Well, it's nice to meet you all. And I wasn't going to start with this, but when you were talking about your company, have you ever heard the story about Annie Ann's Pretzels? How she started? Excuse me. I will do this really quick, but I was in an event, and she's a amazing entrepreneur, and she has an incredible personal story that was really inspiring to me, and I just thought I'd pass it on. Annie Ann was a Quaker, and she was actually grew up in Amish country. She grew up in an Amish faith, I guess. So she was married at about age 18, and she got married and had an 18-month-old kid on the farm. The kid unfortunately got run over by a tractor and was killed. She went through a really bad personal time. Her marriage fell apart. She went to counseling, very young girl, got involved with a counselor, and she speaks about this, so it's personal, but I mean, this is part of her kind of testimony and her message. Got involved with this man who was counseling her. Her marriage was falling apart. Well, her husband was an incredible man and said, look, let's try to reconcile, let's come together. And as he was doing that, and he brought her back in to the home, and they were kind of healing, he started ministering to families who had gone through the same thing, whether it was divorce or, unfaithfulness. And she started baking cookies to bring to these events. When he'd have 2 or 3 or 4 families of people liked her cookies, then she started making pretzels. And 2,000 locations later, it was done. So it's pretty amazing what can happen out of really hard things. So what I'm going to do in 20 minutes or so is I'm going to tell you a little bit about, I'm going to ask you guys a question, but I'm going to tell you about my history and the 2 companies that I've created. One is called Senior Core, which is a healthcare here locally. Can you all hear me okay? Or would you like the mic? Mike? Okay, I'll do the mic. I'm sorry. So talk about some things that brought on those businesses, and then I'm going to hit 5 main points. And those 5 main points are to talk about passion in what you do and picking the right field. 2 is the lean startup mentality and pivoting versus a very concrete business plan and growing and making that part work, because I've done both and have seen some success and failures with both. The 3rd is when to take on investors, whether it's the right thing, and what can happen when that's done, both good and bad. A little bit on looking at disruption, on models that disrupt in my own experience and trying to do that, and what that may mean. And the last is kind of being a bit fearless and walking these things out, because you hit moments where you just feel like it's all going to collapse, and how especially money and things can get in the way. And I'll do this pretty quick, but I'm going to try to hit those 5 main points. So let me just ask real quick. I know you guys have had a long day. How many are here because you own a business? Okay. How many are here because you're thinking about starting a business? Okay. And how many of the people who said they're in a business are in kind of a transitional stage, they're thinking about next steps, what they want to do, things like that? Okay. Well, let me first of all, in about 3 or 4 minutes, just tell you a little bit about my background. I am in the healthcare field serving seniors. I have no experience in the healthcare field serving seniors, except the last 10 years I've been doing it. The way I got into it was threefold. 1, I had a grandmother who was abused in a nursing home. She was in her bed. She was pressing the buzzer for someone to come get her. She was rehabbing. Nobody came. She fell on the floor. She was left there for 13 hours before my aunt came in and found her wedged in next to the bed. She had a heart attack. She lived through it. We brought her home, and my mom, who was a tough Jersey Italian, moved in with her, and 3 months later had a nervous breakdown managing it all. Second, I lived in Japan when I graduated from college. I worked for a real estate firm and in the school systems for 3 years and saw Japanese families all under one roof. I'd go over to someone's house for dinner, and it was great-grandmom, grandmom, all under one roof, all treated with great respect. Lastly, in what I was doing back in the United States after I got back from Japan, I had to study the senior market and the aging demographic and baby boomers. And so once that happened with my grandmother, I had a wonderful job, 2 kids, 1 on the way. I have 5 kids now. And I was a senior vice president at a very large organization making very good money. But I went in, I told my wife, look, I feel like I really need to do this. I want to find a way to have a solution for what my mom couldn't find. And I was making, couple $100,000 a year. I had no debt, and I went in and quit my job cold and started a company that would serve seniors out of my kid's bedroom. And went on a journey, and I'm going to describe two of these journeys because I've gone after a real lean startup mentality, bricks and mortar, just finding my way through, and then trying to hit a big home run and raising millions of dollars to do it, to be the next disruptive model in my field. Okay? So back up. Leave my job, sold everything I had, liquidated my 401k. Nothing wrong with that, you guys. If you believe in what you're doing, you have a passion, you feel a real path, do it. It'll come back. But anyway, and started a company called Senior Core. And what Senior Core was designed around was one thing. What did my mother and my grandmother need? Right? There's nothing better than that personal experience to inspire you, to get you in the trenches, to think outside the box. So I didn't care what the insurance world said. I didn't care what the hospital said. I didn't care what the doctor said. What I cared about was, what did my mom need? And I was going to be her advocate. What did my grandmother need in staying home and getting care and be the advocate? And what did the caregivers need? And it was very interesting because it's a field of staffing that's wrought with problems, turnover, everything else. And so my goal was to keep people at home safe and secure through this company called Senior Core. Got into it, had moments where I was going to go out of business. I could not make payroll. We built a $10 million business. I never had more than a $25,000 line of credit. Sometimes the banks don't want to touch you, right? Sometimes your credit cards are tapped. There were days when my payroll started catching up. This is a true story. Sometimes it takes being a little radical in your faith and your belief you're going to do this. I had a $10,000 payroll coming up. I was in the midweek and wasn't hitting it. And wasn't sure what the bank was going to do, didn't know if I was going to make it. Came home to my wife, stared at my kids. I probably couldn't rub two quarters together at that time. And said, you know, Trish, I'm not sure it's going to happen. We talked about it. We honestly prayed a little about it. And the morning this was supposed to hit, you guys, I got a call from a person in Virginia Beach who was a trust officer who said, hey, are you Tom Knox, the guy who takes care of seniors? I said, yes. He said, well, we have this couple. They're getting kicked out of a Bon Secours facility. They need 24-hour care. They're both demented. It's going to take 2 caregivers. How much would it be? Can you come here and talk to me? I drove there. It was a 1-hour meeting. He said, how do you get paid? I said, we get 1 month up front for what we do. It was $13,200 for the whole month because of all the care. I made it back, went to my bank, slapped the check down 2 hours before payroll was due and made payroll. You know, and those things are part of this journey. It's the greatest part about getting up and speaking today or talking about our success. These things are the challenges that big companies go through, small companies go through in getting there. But they should be encouraged. It doesn't mean you're necessarily reckless or going to fail. It means you may succeed. Anyway, this company grew. I constantly listened like you did. I realized my audience was the caregivers. At one point, when people weren't showing up, it was problematic. I got 50 caregivers in a room, and I said, I'm going to tell you something. You either tell me how to fix this and tell me how to serve you guys well, or I'm pitching my tent somewhere else and going to get a job. And they said, we want to be treated with respect. We want some benefits. We want to be rewarded if we act well and everything else. And I went off and I came up with a program and I brought them all back and I said 2 things. I'm going to do everything you said, but there's going to be requirements you're not used to. We're going to start a school. We're going to bring in only people we want. You're going to work weekends. You're going to do all this stuff. Next thing you knew, we grew really well. So ended up with Senior Core being about, like I said, 400 employees. We cover most of Hampton Roads, about a $10 million a year company, and kind of went from there. Now, what Zach was talking about was an interesting pivot or time for me. The company was going pretty well. This is about 4 years ago, and I am in an airport in Louisville, Kentucky. I get a call from my insurance broker, and he says, hey, Tom, are you sitting down? And I said, yeah. He said, well, I got an issue. He said, AIG, the company, you guys know AIG, they're the ones that, big insurance company, got in trouble. Well, because of what's going on with them in Wall Street, they're pulling out of all their high-risk insurance. You were one of them, and the fact that you were 5 days away from renewal, they can cancel you. Now, workers' comp for my business is a big deal. And in fact, if I don't have it, I can't serve people. So I'm sitting in this airport and I'm talking to him and I'm going, look, you can't do this to me. This is totally unacceptable. You know, you got to come up with that. Well, there's nothing I could do. I said, well, you got to buy me a couple days. He goes, well, I don't think there's anything I could do. Your rates are going to go from $200,000 a year to $700,000 a year, and I need it by Friday. You know, what are you supposed to do about that? So I went into a lounge, either had a beer or a cup of coffee. I don't even remember what time it was. And I was like, you know, what the heck am I going to do? I got 5 kids. I got 400 employees. And I sat there and I said, if I truly have to start over, if I am going out of business, I've got to have a plan, because this could happen next week. And I was like, well, what's my biggest competition? What's happening in the industry? And I was like, do I start another home care company? Do I get into assisted living? Well, my biggest competition is Craigslist. It's people hiring privately. It's people going outside of an agency. Well, I've hired about 2,000 people over time. I've helped a couple thousand families. What if I build a platform that could do this and families could do it themselves? And wrote it out on a cocktail napkin in a half hour after that phone call. And I called it CareFamily, carefamily.com. Well, I had to go back to real life. My business was collapsing. My HR person told the staff, so everybody thinks we're going out of business. And I remember not really having a great alternative, but waking up in the morning and calling my staff together and said, we're serving people, we're going to serve clients, something's going to happen, we're going to figure it out. And 24 hours or 48 hours before the it was all supposed to kind of come down, someone wrote us for less than we had. But I was sitting, so the business stayed in business, we moved on, but what happened out of that event was not the insurance issue, it was getting this idea. And about 2 or 3 months later, I brought in a bunch of really good insurance executives, people who started AmeriGroup here locally, which is publicly traded. And I said, tell me what you think about this idea. And after some talk, I walled it off and I began to build it up. And CareFamily was built to be the anti-agency. I was creating my own competition to put myself out of business. It's almost like starting Barnes & Noble and saying, you know what? I mean, believe me, my scale is not that, but you know what I mean. Starting Barnes & Noble and saying, geez, I could put myself and others out of business by doing Amazon and selling the books online. And that's really what we created to do. Now, I took a different direction in this company, and I am going to come back to my main points and finish on time, but I went a different direction. I said, all right, I have this big business plan, this big disruptive model. I'm going to build technology, and I have all these people around me who are really good, who are experienced in the healthcare field and ran Fortune 500 companies. Let's put together a PPM, private placement memorandum. We raised $3.5 million in 3 days. So now I have this bricks and mortar built out of sweat, small line of credit, and then this kind of new disruptive model coming along. When I talk about pivoting, when I talk about lean startup, when I talk about investors in my last 10 minutes or so, I'm going to bring all this together, but I wanted you to understand where I'm coming from. So CareFamily launched. Here's what was going to happen. Whew. You build an incredible website. You recruit caregivers all over the country. It was like the internet moment when we started recruiting. Ding, 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 10,000, 20,000, 30,000, 40,000 caregivers across the country literally enrolled to work in this system. Then I had to find families, not as easy, kind of trickling in. Okay, so how are we going to get people in? Started to get some people in. But a couple things I realized in my disruptive model. Anybody have an idea on what may have gone wrong with my model? Want to throw anything out? Huh? Payment, exactly. So what happened was we were going to make our money off of building kind of an online agency. Background checks, screening of caregivers, create this incredible base. Families come in and hire the caregivers, and we do bonding, liability insurance, taxes, so everything's done legally. So you could have the best of both worlds of hiring privately and having caregivers who make more money. Testing. There we go. Sorry. So back to this model, when I built it to be disruptive, I probably should explain this better. Agencies charge 21 an hour. Caregivers make about 9 or 10. Does that make sense if you go to an agency to get care? In this model, caregivers make 13, families pay 17. 30% more pay, 30, 40% less at times. They come together, they hire them, all good. Well, what happened was when we started to get people together, payment was one. I like this caregiver. Let's meet in the living room. Hey, do you want to pay this company? Do you care about taxes, anything else? Let's go off and do it ourselves. I bet I have 5,000 families across the country getting care. I ended up being a free, really good Craigslist. The second thing was I didn't do a good enough job looking at my demographic. Who gets care for mom, usually? Who do you think? Huh? Adult children. They're in the probably 55 to 60-year-old age range, and they're not really comfortable buying shoes online yet. So how comfortable are they in arranging care for mom online? But the lesson is that if you keep looking at what you have and pivoting, it can work. And what happened was I realized, okay, it didn't happen the way I thought, but man, we built an incredible recruitment network. We built an incredible payment system for domestic hires. We built an incredible kind of vehicle that if people are in the local market or an agency can use it to handle private hires. I built a business model that could be plugged in other places. And this is one of the things I want to say is that sometimes getting in the game, sometimes just when you're sitting here with your company, it may not look, I know you all know this, but it may not look like it did, today, 2 years from now. But if you stay in the game enough and you keep being innovative,
pivoting.
Yeah, it'll work. So now when I sit here today, we're not totally out of the woods, but 3 things. Number 1, Medicaid came to us and said, you know what, we're learning we can save money if families hire themselves, but there's not a vehicle to do it. Well, I kind of said, guess what? I built a vehicle with private money and private people involved, so we had to build it very high touch, high quality. I have it, and it can match into Medicaid. So we're now testing in 2 states. And think about it, Medicaid's expanding. Did I set out to do that? Absolutely not. Recruiting, there are agencies across the country, the biggest problem they have is finding caregivers. Well, guess what? I built a tool that can recruit thousands of caregivers across the country. I can plug it in. And lastly, we're about to buy our first company in Richmond, Virginia, it looks like, that does Medicaid and agency care and helps veterans. And this vehicle I built can be the vehicle for running that local market. My point in saying all that is the kind of getting in the game, trying to be innovative, thinking about maybe being disruptive, it led me in paths I didn't think by staying in the game. Sounds great, maybe in some ways we're still finding our way, still trying to work, but great opportunities. So let me hit, in the next 10 minutes, and then I'll let you go, the 5 areas I was going to talk about. 1 is passion. Those of you who work in the businesses you have, can I ask really, how many of you love what you do, you would almost do it for free? I would just say, I know that's not the case, but man, there are times where I feel like, especially if you guys really stretch and grow, like you were talking about your business here in your garage, there's going to come a time probably where you're working out of a commercial kitchen, you become a franchisor, and you're not going to be delivering cookies and have your hand in the dough. You're going to be dealing with people who are complaining because they don't like the operation. You got to really care and know in your gut you love this thing. And that could be overstated. I just know that there have been times I absolutely would have walked unless I really cared. So if you're on that fence about taking a big step, or maybe like I did, going on a really financial, walking out there in faith a little bit, hopefully you have your hands around what you care about. And if you're faithful, if you're doing it only for money or the business model, it just may be a little bit tougher. The second thing is the kind of lean pivot startup mentality. Okay, the second company I told you about, CareFamily, one of the hardest things that I had is the fact that I raised $3 million off a business plan. Nothing wrong with business plans. But as things started to go south, I had two problems. Because early on they did. I told you the reasons why. One, I had raised all this money on a plan. So a good part of the group said to me, look, my investors, you set out a plan. You raised all this money. You got to stick with it. Now, they were right. But there was a part of me that knew enough about the business in my first company. I knew some things were wrong. I could tell people weren't clicking. They weren't matching. They were going around us like you were nodding back there. It was harder to kind of change because we had raised all this money and pre-built all this infrastructure. Okay? If you know you're going to go, I can't use you because I walked in when you were talking, but you know you're direct to consumer, right? And let's say that you do better with businesses, but you kind of don't have the ability to pivot one way or the other. Well, I was a little trapped. And one of the most frustrating moments I had, because I knew better, because my first company was so lean, I would change prices like that. I'd get caregivers in a room, we'd change the program. The second one was more, we had built out a technology, we were going to stay the course, and even though it probably needed more pivoting. Have any of you read The Lean Startup? Okay, if you haven't, you may want to read it. I went out to, I think, an Inc. conference or something, and the Lean Startup guy talked. And he was talking about the difference between Fortune 500 thinking, big corporation thinking, and startup thinking. Now, I think there's relevancy in both, and I'm fortunate enough, and when all said and done, I'm very fortunate for the people and the investors I have, but there was definitely this tug. I went out and saw this guy and heard him, and he was talking about, look, a business plan past 6 months sometimes is not what you can look at. I'm not saying that's always right. You can't make every decision on what's going to happen 2 years from now. You got to do enough. It's called a minimal viable product. Do enough to get it out there to find out if it's going to work. And my suggestion, if there's any one takeaway, is if you're in a situation where you can evolve a little bit, sometimes when it's ours and we're so close to it, we want it to be perfect. We're probably all in our own way perfectionists in here. But we want it to be, well, when I get it here, or I have this part done, or when this website has this, or when my packaging is this way, then I'll do it. You know what? Put a cookie in a bag and bring it out and see if anybody wants it and likes what it tastes like. I mean, there's kind of ways to do this. If I had my first company do over, or the second company do over again, this technology company, I built out this whole trail of steps to employment. My gosh, I should have seen if people wanted to take caregivers first and charge them $30 to get one, just to see, and then build the product out. I spent millions of dollars on technology and kind of evolution that was premature. Now, it may catch up and be good now because I pivoted the right way, but man, if I could be leaner, raise less money, and kind of move along, I would have. And maybe that resonates to some of you, or maybe it'll resonate to you in the future, but if you can be thinking that way, it's smart. Investors. I've done one company where I own 100% of it that's been pretty successful. I own a second one where I own the majority, and it's good I do. I probably would have been fired with the course it took and how long it took. And I think I'm the right guy for the job, but if I was looking at it from the outside and looking at what it's taken to get there and the timing and the results, I probably would have been and should have been fired. Okay, so take away the majority thing for a second, but it's important because the minute you give up enough, when you give up majority, your life will never be the same. Getting a partner, your life will never be the same. Investors, your life will never be the same. It can be really good. But the first thing is you're really to give up that majority part. If I was taking investors again, I would be lean until I had a really fixed way of plugging into something that I was going to make money off of. So I probably, if I did this over again, could have done what I did when I realized Medicaid was coming up, gone back and said, I want to raise $5 million or $1 million or $3 million because I can plug into Medicaid and we can grow it. So I invested a lot, built a big business plan, and tried to move towards it. But when you have a business, you're not really sure how it's all going to pan out because you're not plugging into a fixed contract or fixed income or some way you can guarantee the business. There's going to be movement in there. So maybe staying lean, moving towards that, and get investment at the time It's good. Now, I want to say this because I want to make sure I respect where I am right now, too. The fact I have these people who are an incredible group that can give me amazing credibility with states or insurance companies or the business community, it actually is all worked out. And I'm thankful I am where I am, but I wouldn't have wanted to go through what I've done again. And again, so my advice is try to watch that lean investor side. And when you get an investor, two things. I think if you could take it from people who don't need to be getting their money back right away and sleep at night, they're not worried about, my gosh, are you making this, are you making that? I, thank God, said no when people wanted to give me more. So no one I have with me is really going to fall apart if they never get their money back. If you can kind of keep it to that. My mom wanted to give money. Oh, thank God I didn't. So if I make it, I'll give her something. But you know what I mean. So just kind of watch that. Any questions on the investor side? I can take questions after. But there is a time for it. Just make sure it's when you really clearly want to ramp up. Disruption's interesting. How many of you feel like, I won't take too much time on this, if you don't feel like you're really there. Is anybody feeling like they're in a place where they can do it really differently, disrupt an industry, pivot the way they operate a bit where, my gosh, like mine was, there's 20,000 home care companies out there. I'm going to offer something 30% less, pay caregivers 30% more. I still think it's got legs on that side. And people are going to come to me, and it's going to disrupt the way traditional home care is delivered. Does anybody else feel like that in what they're doing? You do? What are you doing? I'm just curious real quick. Sure, you could just, in 15, 30 seconds, you get the elevator speech opportunity. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. It's good. I think when you're doing something you think could have a disruptive element, this would just be my only advice I was going to give to it. Looking at it now, I felt like the disruption pattern had one way to go. I was going to disrupt this sector, this type of business. They were going to be my competition. Looking back in hindsight now, take every element you're building of your company and make sure it is flexible and pliable enough that it can apply to other things if need be. So when I made decisions on employment or tax platforms, I knew that, okay, if I serve businesses or do B2B, I'm making it compliant enough. So, I mean, I think if you're going after something you really feel like is different or disruptive, it's okay to hedge. I don't think it has to mess you up if you plan for other things accordingly. So, I've learned a lot from that process. I'm not where I thought I'd be or land where I'm going to be from a disruptive nature, but I created a business that can now serve the different avenues. The last thing I want to say is, and it kind of plays into the stepping out and be passionate, is I want to encourage you if that's needed. There's kind of a fearless mentality you have to have when you do this. There are certainly moments where there's a great book by Bruce Wilkinson. I think it's called The Dream Giver. It had a couple interesting analogies. One was when you're really stepping out and doing something different out of the box with a business. First of all, most people will tell you you're crazy. I mean, most people will tell you to kind of stay where you are, stay in your job, stay what you're doing. You're safe. The economy's bad. Who would want to do it these days? The laws are changing all the time. I actually think in some ways that's the time you push the throttle down and you're really fearless. And usually it's money, or I don't have the contacts, the money, the ability to do this. And I think it's really a day-to-day process, and don't fear staying in the game. And I find that banks at times or people or vendors will rescue you too. If they know you're on the right track and believe in it, do it. So I think being fearless. The other part I have about that is, I know oftentimes when people start in their business, they kind of have a dual track mentality. Well, if I kind of hold on to this job or hold on to this opportunity, when this picks up, I'll do it. Just make sure you're not avoiding what could be your greatest gift. Inspiration comes out of desperation. I had the opportunity when I left my job to start Senior Corps. They were going to keep me on a contract for a year at about half my salary. My gosh, on paper, that would have been great. I stared at my wife and my kids and said, worst case, I could pay the bills. There was something intuitive in me that said, you need to cut the cord. You need to wake up and face the set of problems you have. Because if you're hungry, you're desperate, you need opportunities, you're going to treat your life completely different and your business if you walk out in faith knowing you've got no choice but to make it work. I'm not encouraging recklessness. I'm not encouraging you to do something stupid. But I am telling you, you will be a better performer and you will be more engaged in your business to make it work if you cut certain cords. In the last 5 years, I've served two masters in a number of ways. To companies, to missions. I've had to kind of work that through, see how I bring that together. But I'm so happy that one way I didn't do that was certainly to kind of say I am going all out to make my business work. And I would never be able to be where I am today, and not that that's any great place, but knowing that I have a really good future on platforms unless I had made that step to just cut the cord. So I would encourage you, if you feel like you have the passion, if you feel like you have the knowledge, if you feel like you have the right idea, even if everybody's telling you no, that you could pull it through, not to be afraid to take the risks to do it, and do it early. I started this second company with 5 kids, a little bit older, 10 years older, and with kids who were realizing when they didn't have money or things as much. It's okay. It's good they see it, and it's been fine. But man, I'm glad I took some steps earlier to do it because it is an interesting road. But I think there's never been that's why I think what Zach's doing is so important. There has never been a better time to jump in. People are jumping out of industries. People are jumping out of business. People are afraid. That's when folks like us who have a vision and an idea to bring it to reality can really shine. So I would encourage you to walk out, all of you, in that faith and make it work. Okay.